Hello, and welcome to Tangled Twists. I'm Lissa, and today we'll be making an 18th century rump. Rumps were a popular way to enhance the bum and hips in the 18th century. This is a practice that you see a lot across time. You can see it in the Tudor era with farthingales and bum rolls. You can see it in the Victorian era with bustle skirts. Anytime you're getting a more enhanced body shape, that's usually not being done with changes to your actual body. That's typically being done with accessories that make the appearance of your body change. So in the Edwardian era, the very popular pigeon breast shape, where your body makes this gentle S curve, your body's not actually doing that. There were different ways that you could stuff out your shirt to make that chest come out more. You could add things to your hips to bring the back out more. It's a very, very popular way historically to make your body appear to fit the fashionable shape of the time. And as with any fashion, how ridiculous that shaping is generally goes with how important you are in society. If you have more money, you're allowed to take up more space and you're allowed to look more exaggerated than if you have less money and are maybe lower class. What that means, though, is that when you're making historical clothing from any time period, you really have to pay attention to what they're wearing underneath, or the shape that you're going to get isn't going to read the way you necessarily want it to. We've seen with my stays and my skirts, it's a very cute look for a modern look. I could wear that out to maybe a Ren Fest and no one would look at me twice. It wouldn't be a problem. But if I want something to look truly 18th century, it's going to have more of a shelf-like butt on the back. That means I need a rump. I have already made one, but I made it kind of small. I'd never made a rump before, and I didn't want to go overly ridiculous in size. So now I'm needing to make a new rump, one that's a little bit bigger and will fit the gown and jacket styles that I've picked for my floral fabric series, and make them look like they belong, make them look the way they're supposed to look, because that undergarment's going to be correct. The nice thing about rumps is that, unlike stays, they are basically just a pillow, which means they are so quick and so easy to make. You could very easily put one of these together in a day. It can take a couple months to do your stays, so if you need like a little break, you won't be able to properly fit it until you have your stays done. But tossing a rump in there as a way to keep a project going and keep your sanity is always an awesome way to go about things. Like I said, they are very quick, they are very easy, and we're going to go and get started making a brand new big rump for me. I'm using Scroop Patterns Francis rump pattern, which I have already prepared because I made the view B small rump for my historically adequate witch. I'm making view A here because I wanted to try out a larger rump for the floral fabric series, and because I have everything prepared, we can move right into fabric cutting. The pieces are pretty big, and they're recommended to be cut on the fold of the fabric. Since this is an undergarment that doesn't rely on fabric grain for shaping or structure, I'm not being extra in getting things lined up. It doesn't need that level of detail. The fabric here is a mid-weight cotton canvas that was left over from the under petticoat I made for my historically adequate witch. It's probably a little heavier than is truly needed, but my other scrap pieces weren't big enough, and there isn't enough of this canvas to use to make trousers or shorts or something more interesting, so I feel like this is a good use for it. The important part here is getting the marks transferred off the pattern piece. I apologize that you can't really see my chalk marks. There aren't a lot of marking methods that show up well on camera, and that also come off the fabric later. There are a lot of pleats in addition to the quilted lines that I need to keep track of, so I'm marking the pleats with a straight line and the quilting lines with an angled line so I can tell them apart. I'm only marking around the edges for the quilting lines, which I will then use a ruler to connect. I find this easier than trying to bend and fold the pattern to try to get a straight seam line. To do the markings on the other half of the piece, I'm tipping it up and marking behind each existing mark instead of trying to realign the pattern piece. It's not as precise, but I'm more interested in speed than precision for this. Sewing my main seam is the first and biggest place that this can go horribly wrong, not because the seam is anything special, but because it's critical that the pattern marks are on the inside at this point. This is going to get turned, and if you can see the marks now, they're going to end up on the inside where you can't see them after you've turned it. Pressing here is more of a best practice habit than anything else. When you get used to pressing everything, it tends to carry over even when it's not completely necessary. If you're in a hurry, it won't matter much if you skip this step. The rump is never going to be seen unless you choose to show it to someone, and there isn't a structural advantage to having it pressed. This is more of a cosmetic step. The pressing on it gets a little weird because of the curve. As always, I'm pressing flat as sewn to set up, and then I'm using my ham to help support the curve of the seam. Then I can fold it flat, right sides out, and press the seam flat the rest of the way. I was careful with keeping my marks where they belonged, so now I'm ready to stitch the quilted lines. These seams are going to provide a framework of stuffing channels that will help to shape the rump. I'm following best practice here as well and always sewing in one direction. In this case, I'm going from the open edge to the closed edge. It's another technique that isn't really necessary here because it won't affect the rump if it has some fabric puckers, but I'm doing the best practice because you do what you practice. And I want to decrease the chance of forgetting myself and doing something important the wrong way. So anytime I'm doing a simple thing like this, I like to stick to that technique so that that's what I'm used to doing. When all of my seams are in place, it is time to stuff. I have tiny wrists and very flexible hands, so I'm able to squeeze into the openings to get the stuffing in. If that doesn't work for you, you can use a dowel or something similar to get the stuffing in. As long as your tool is stick-shaped and fairly rigid, it should work just fine. You can use the end of a spatula, the end of a cooking spoon, not an eating spoon, those are going to be a little bit too short and flat, but maybe like a wooden spoon that you cook with you could use, and that should work quite well. You control the size of the rump with this step by how much stuffing you put into each section. I'm stuffing to plump but soft based on my experience with the previous rump. I don't want it limp because that won't give my skirts enough lift, but I don't want to stuff it to firm because that's a lot of stuffing and I'm not going for a giant rump here. I'm also stuffing the smaller sections near the edges to give a little boost to the shaping of the hips. Historically, you would use horsehair or a wool batting for this. I happen to have a giant pile of polyfill that I've had for ages that I'm working through. You could just as easily use something like cotton balls, which aren't historical, but also are not plastic. If I didn't have so much polyfill, that's likely what I'd be using. And this is where things start to get fiddly. I need to take this stuffed thing and seal up its edges and put in some pleats for shaping. Technically, I ought to have basted the opening closed before I started putting the pleats in. In reality, I don't always remember basting steps, and as long as you're reasonably careful, it generally works out okay. I'm pinning each pleat in place as I make it, keeping the edge even and the pleat as straight as possible. As you watch it come together, you'll see where the pleats start to curve that raw edge. That's part of what helps it go around the body. Once the pleats are secure, I can stitch the edge down. I've decided to do this by hand because I want the control that hand sewing gives. I've got a lot of reasonably thick fabric all stacked up on itself, which can make it really tricky to feed through a machine. Doing the first section would probably be fine, but once I crossed the center section, my pleats would be pointing toward the machine instead of away, and that means the second half of the pleats could distort going underneath the presser foot. I don't know that that would cause a problem, but I don't know that it won't either, so I'm playing it safe. On top of that, this thing is basically a giant pillow at this point, and that can make it really hard to control at the machine. So I'm working with a running back stitch until I get to the pleats, and then I'm using a back stitch across the pleats themselves. The extra strength of the back stitch should hold everything in place nicely, even though the fabric here is really thick. All that's left now is to stick a waist tie on it. I'm using my cotton twill tape for this. I keep a big roll of it on hand because I really like it for ties. This tape is about 3/4 of an inch wide, which is wide enough to be used to cover the raw edge of the rump. I've cut the recommended length of tape and I'm pinning it to the rump starting at the center. This will keep my ties even, and it's actually a little bit easier to work away from the center on this. You probably could sew right through both sides of the tape in one go, but I have really bad luck with that. Somehow I always end up missing sections, so instead I'm whip stitching the tape to each side. As I go along, I take some stitches past the rump a little way before I turn, and then I can turn the piece and sew down the other side. Once the tape is secure, I can turn over the raw ends and finish them up. This is a surprisingly important step, even though it doesn't seem like it should be. If you don't secure the ends here, they will eventually start to fray and turn into a big fluffy mess of knots. If you have to put it through the wash, that fraying will get even worse. You can skip this step for a little while if you need the piece urgently, but make sure you come back to it before you use it again. The fraying will increase every time you wear or wash the rump. To give you an idea of what the rump is actually functionally doing, we're going to take this in steps. Starting here, we see the stays with my skirt. It's completely cute. I can wear this as an outfit, no big deal. But if you've seen 18th century portraiture, or honestly, even people wandering around your local Renaissance fair, the skirts are usually bigger and fluffier, right? Well, that wasn't always done with lots of layers of fabric because fabric could be quite expensive, and that's where the rump comes in. Here I've got the rump on top of the ensemble. That's to show you what the rump is going to be doing when it's being worn properly. You can see that the shape that it's given in the back with all of those channels on the rump and the pleats across the top, it's really kind of rounded and curved that out to really enhance the shape of the bum across the back. Now, when you go and wear this properly, your stays would be underneath and you would tie the rump around your waist and then you put the skirt on over the rump. And that's what you're seeing here. Look how much bigger this looks. The skirts look absolutely huge. It looks like I have a whole bunch of very fluffy petticoats underneath this, and it is just that one single skirt. That's really the difference that this makes here. And when I'm making the gown and jackets that I'm planning on, they're all going to need to go over this as well. They will not look right if I don't have this rump in place. They'll sag, they'll look flat, and they'll just look really sad and unhappy. So now that I have my rump made, I can finally make some progress on my gown and my jackets. I haven't been able to work on those yet because they need to be fitted over the rump if they're going to look right, and there's not really a way to have something stand in for that. You really do actually need the real rump you're going to use. But now that I have that, I can start pushing that project forward. And that's it for today. I will be pushing along with my floral fabric series, and I have a few more things to kind of intersperse because I know they're going to take a while. So come on back in 2 weeks and I will have another video up for you. I'll see you soon.